Hi there, and welcome to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. This is Bryan, and I'm with my friend Jeff, and we'll be talking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in all its forms. But before we do that, let's listen to a message from one of our proud sponsors.
This episode of Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is brought to you by the duty-free mega market, Port Brasta, Alpha Centauri. You do not have to be crazy to shop here, but it helps. Take it from brain care specialist Gag Hellfront.
Be like the 22nd elephant with heated value in space. Bark.
The preceding slogan is a clever and elaborate pun in Lingua Centauri and is completely incomprehensible in any other language. Therefore, it is entirely pointless for a duty-free shop at a spaceport, much less as a commercial for this podcast. Hey Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you?
Well, I was feeling bad.
You were feeling bad?
Yeah, see, during our bonus episode about poetry, there was this story about how I basically mocked you for writing poetry when you were telling me about a poem that you wrote that you were so really proud of. And I guess at the time I didn't know what the poem meant to you. So when I heard you say that you had distinct memories of that incident, I started to feel bad.
Oh, you shouldn't have felt bad.
But then I felt good about starting to feel bad, so everything's okay now.
All right, well, that works. Oh, gosh.
So today we're going to be talking about the book, the fourth book in the trilogy, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish.
Right.
In general, I guess my first question to you is, overall, what did you think about the book?
Well, it's really interesting to me. I think that in terms of his prose, Douglas Adams' writing in this book, I think it's definitely my top. I like the way he has written this book. There's a lot of imagery that he uses in his language, and for me, it brings back more memories than I thought. When I read through it again, I'm like, yeah, this was the one that I remember really well. So it's interesting.
Yes, I kind of feel the same way. I have difficulty saying this is my favorite book because you can't go over the first one. But
no,
of the first four,
no way.
This one I think I like better for multiple different reasons than I do the previous two. However, one of the things that I was disappointed, and we kind of had a little discussion about this, is for me, this isn't the book I hoped for when I read the beginning.
Right.
It's close and it will fit the niche, but the book I hoped for would have been so tremendous. And this is still, like we said, I'm not going to say I don't like this book because it's number 2. But my expectations, and I guess the reason I had these weird expectations is because there was no expectation of this book. The trilogy had been completed.
Yes, exactly.
Nobody was going, wow, I wonder when the next one's going to come out, because the story was done.
Right.
So when this came out, it was fantastic.
Right. And I can appreciate where you're going with that. It is funny because the book may not be very heavy in plot, but the sentimentality in it is what I think I appreciate the most. It's a little bit different spin for Adams. I mean, he's got all of his standards in there in terms of his joke telling and that kind of thing, but it's much more sentimental, and I guess I like that about this book the most.
So I guess I'm going to say, you know how the people who are closest to you can aggravate you the most?
Absolutely.
That's kind of how I feel about parts of this book.
Okay, all right.
So I really, really like the book. Therefore, when I find things that I can't reconcile in my mind, they really aggravate me.
Right.
And we'll talk about a couple of them
right.
coming up.
All right.
When we get to them in the book.
You got it.
the book aggravated me from word one. I got this book. I can't tell you how excited I was that this book was out and that it was given to me by my uncle again for Christmas. So he gave me the first one and he gave me this one.
Right.
And I sat down to read it right away, and I read Far Out in the Uncharted Backwaters. And I'm like, wait up. Oh, come on. And then I went and I got the first book, and I sat there and I went back and forth. I'm like, this is exactly the same thing. Are we just going to read a rehash of everything that we've wrote? Was this just a last minute money grab? And then when in the first book I read, this is not her story, but it's the story of the terrible catastrophe. And in the new book it said, this is her story. I flipped out. I could not have been happier. In my mind, at this point, reading the book, we might not read a single character we are familiar with.
Okay.
This could have been a complete and total break. We told that story.
Right.
This is going to be a brand new story. We're not going to learn about Zaphod or Ford or Arthur or Trillian. They don't even come into this because this is her story in her little cafe.
Right.
That's not what this turned out to be, obviously. But that was my first thought when I read the book and I read that opening and I found out that it was her story. I was arguing with you that this is Arthur's story, and I think we came to the agreement that this is Fenchurch's story from Arthur's point of view.
Right. And yeah, I agree that that's quite a fine line to draw there. And some would say even inappropriate, but it does feel like a different story. You're right. It's not her story.
Part 1. Arthur hitchhikes his way back to the planet Earth, which has not been destroyed. In the rain, he hitchhikes his way back to his house, which is still there. On the way, he almost lost his towel, was splashed repeatedly on the roadway, and did lose his copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Passed out from sedation in the back seat of the car that picked him up, there was a girl that captivated him. Her name is Fenny, and she has a fractured mind. She suffers from delusions that she is living in the real world. During his car ride home, Arthur learns from Fenny's brother that the world believes the appearance of the Vogon ships and the destruction of the Earth was a hallucination. The ships just vanished. After he was dropped off, the car with the girl drove away, and the girl seemed to be gone forever. Rob McKenna is a truck driver who has cataloged 231 types of rain. It is always raining on Rob McKenna. He hates the rain even though he is a rain god. The clouds like to nurture him and to water him. Ford Prefect is in the habit of using loopholes to get free drinks. He was drinking heavily because he thought that his entry in the guide about the Earth was about to be deleted. He was still owed 15 years back pay for writing Mostly Harmless. When the guide was revised, he was surprised to see that the entry about the Earth was greatly expanded. Everything he wrote about the Earth was now included. He realized that something weird was happening and wanted it to be happening to him. He stole a police helicopter and then traded it in for a first-class ticket on the next ship leaving the system. He wondered about Arthur for this first time in a long time.
Like in his previous books, this book also happens to be full of interesting characters, ideas, and concepts that have blown my mind. Did you find that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I thought was funny in the very beginning of this book was that he talks about the galactic averages, and he says that the average being has 2.4 legs.
Yes. Yep.
And it's funny because it's just something you wouldn't think about, you know?
Right, because that was when spaceship was landing.
Right.
And this is outside of what's happening. This is one of the things that he's doing, I think, more in this book than I remember from the other books, which is speaking directly to the reader.
Right. Yeah, and I have a note of that much later in the book that I thought was quite
definitely.
interesting. Yeah.
So here he's telling the reader that the spaceship is landing, and you would imagine that it contains 6 people.
Right.
And then that's when he goes into this galactic average thing, and all just to say that, yeah, you'd be right. It does kind of hold 6 people. It was so. I liked periodically throughout this book how he cuts from the story and he's talking directly to me, the reader.
Right.
And so as for these interesting characters, he comes up with this guy named Rob McKenna. And he's described, and they're mentioning all of the different types of rain that he distinguishes between. He has like 231, because I think the Eskimos had 230 types of snow. He had to have one more. So he has 231 types of rain.
Right. And as they're reciting them, it has that whole Forrest Gump kind of feel.
Yes, definitely. But the one that he's driving through now is number 17, which is a dirty bladder. And I could completely relate to this because this was one of those rains that you don't think your windshield wipers are doing anything. It doesn't matter whether you have them on or off. So you turn the wipers off, and it definitely gets worse. It just doesn't get better when you turn them back on again.
Right. And I love how he describes him as being wetter than an otter in a washing machine.
Yeah, that's right. And so pretty early in the story, they want to make sure that we know that Ford is going to be involved. So they cut over to him, and he's in this bar, and he's about to be killed because they won't accept his American Express card.
Right. He's in the old Pink Dog bar.
Right. And here's where he tells what I would consider kind of a Groucho Marx type of joke. He says, all eyes were on Ford Prefect. Some of them were on stalks.
I love that line.
Yes, that was perfect.
Yeah, and I like while he's discussing things with the bartender, Adams describes it, all of a sudden there became a missile crisis type of hush that covered the bar.
Yeah, that's probably when he asked for credit.
Exactly. And of course, another strange character pops up here. I mean, like literally pops up, right?
Yes. This bar has a disembodied arm of the previous owner that is a bouncer.
So weird. And they describe the arm as having a dog-like loyalty to the bar.
Yes, and it's literally the muscle.
I guess they're having a discussion, and the arm is just sitting there lightly denting the bar.
Yeah, with his finger, he's like tapping and denting the bar. Ford is using a loophole to not have to pay for any drinks by using the rules set up by the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. As a field reporter, he's not allowed to take any favors for mentions in the guide. But if you try to actually pay, and they won't let you, and your life is in danger, then it's okay. There's also the if you want to, but the if you want to, you kind of have to split it with the editor. So he likes to mess around with the first two.
Yep. I love that.
So reading that scene, you don't know where it's going.
No, not at all. And I love how Adams has in here, he talks about when Ford mentions the word credit, the arm grabs Ford and starts to squeeze him, and then Ford goes, "Arr!" Then Adam says, in the book, he says, credit and arg. These two words were often said together.
Together. That's right. So Ford gets out of the bar without having to pay, and he's walking through the shadier part of town. And I love this line. He gets approached, and what we're to believe is a prostitute says, "Do you want to have a good time?" And he answered with, "As far as I can tell, I'm having one."
Oh, gosh.
So that whole thing in the bar where he's being throttled by a disembodied arm, and there was also a bird in there, I guess, that was going to threaten to peck out his eyes. He's just having a great old time.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny when he's walking down there. It's still kind of a puzzling line that goes down there. He talks about a pack animal that was looking for some refreshment, and he finds a bar where he can be photographed and fed.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, photograph?
Right.
What the heck?
Yes. Every time through the book, it still confused me. Nothing ever jumped up and said, "Now I know what he means."
I don't think I want to know what he means.
No. There was a good line that involved the Jenks spirit, where when he was having that conversation with the woman that asked him if he wanted to have a good time,
right?
He took out the bottle of Jenks spirit and his towel, and they said he wiped the bottle with the towel, but it had the opposite effect than he intended. And my first thought was, oh, the towel made the bottle dirty, but instead the bottle cleaned the towel.
Exactly. From the virulent diseases.
Yes.
And during this scene, there's another really good line, and Ford is mentioning to the lady that he's met that he's owed 15 years of back pay for writing 2 words.
Correct.
And she says to him, why we're writing, how did she say that? She said something like,
which one was the tough one?
Which one was the hard one? That's what she said.
Yeah.
Which one was the hard one? And he said, the first one. The second one came one afternoon as I was just laying around somewhere. I mean, just like the first word he took for 15 years to write.
And then he owned up and said that he actually wrote a lot.
Right.
It got edited down.
You know, the little things that go around this twisted man's mind, but when they talks about the on-off switch as the off switch being changed to mode execute ready.
Yes. Instead of the now old-fashioned access standby,
Yeah, exactly.
which had so long ago replaced the appallingly stone-aged off.
Oh my!
You know what
gosh.
that reminded me of?
What's that?
And this is what's going to tell everybody how old we are. This was back in 1984.
Right.
And personal computers and stuff in its infancy. 10 years after that, which would have been like 1994, when we were kind of in our heyday of getting to know each other, we are online with AOL.
Right. Oh my gosh.
And for people, you might not believe this, but you used to go to the grocery store or the post office to see if AOL had put out their new CDs yet with the newest version of their software.
And if you got a new one, you could sign up again and get free time.
Yes. So we'd have a conversation, something like, "Hey, did you upgrade to the new version of AOL yet?" "No, I haven't. What's it like?" "Well, they discovered a new shade of blue." Because that was the main difference, is that the blue was a little bit different shade than it was before.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And then some typical Douglas Adams type of things where he does opposites. Instead of warring gangs in this area that Ford is in, there are warring police groups.
Right.
So you've got the police are fighting like gangs. It was just kind of weird, and I don't know what that purpose was in there. Like, I never found a tie-in to what was happening.
Except that it gives them the foil to steal the helicopter, right?
It does give him the foil. Yes, it does. So they had to talk about the police gangs fighting each other, leaving the helicopter unattended so he could steal it. There. Now I know why that was put in there.
So right after Ford steals the helicopter and trades it in, they jump back in the story to the continuation of Arthur's hitchhiking.
Yeah, hitchhiking to back to his town or whatever.
Right. Arthur's in the car with Russell, Fenny's brother. And they have a long discussion about how oddly Fenny acts. And Russell at one point says something that just sticks with me and is stuck with me forever. And I've never been able to, I didn't think of looking it up back then, and I only just thought of looking it up now. But he says something to the effect of, oh, I don't know what's on her mind. It could be that pair of Don Alfonso's tweezers. Okay?
Yes.
And so Don Alfonso's tweezers. So first I'm going to ask you, have you ever thought about Don Alfonso's tweezers?
Not once.
Okay. Not once. So it never entered your mind that there was something odd about this.
No.
Okay.
Well, I am used to reading his stuff and having no idea what he's talking about when he's doing references.
Okay, so this is a reference that even if you know the answer, it doesn't make any sense, okay?
Okay.
So there's two things that I want to say here. I've been intrigued by this Don Alfonso's tweezers for a long time. So I decided this time I'm going to look it up, all right?
Okay.
I can't find anything that makes a reference to Don Alfonso's tweezers, and I keep looking, and guess what? I do find something.
Okay.
Don Alfonso is a famous Italian chef, and that Italian restaurant has been around forever, like a long time. And the reference to the tweezers, the only thing I found there is that it's a pair of tweezers, which is, kind of a long, skinny pair that they use for prepping food. Okay?
Okay.
So that's where Don Alfonso's tweezers come. But number two, I'm going to ask you, do you want to play a game?
Okay, sure.
Okay, so here's the game, all right? I'm going to tell you something, and then you should repeat that. And then I'm going to give you another thing, and you're going to add the two of them together. Kind of like, how the 12 Days of Christmas goes?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you the first one, and then I'm going to tell you the second one, and then you're going to repeat back the first to the second. And we're not going to go through 12. Trust me, so it won't be that painful. But so this is where I believe.
Are you going to make me say something rude?
No, I don't believe so. No, but that would be funny if I did. Okay,
Yeah.
But I think this is where all this comes from. So here we go. Are you ready?
All right.
Now repeat after me. This is called the Tibetan memory trick. All right.
Okay.
1 hen.
1 hen.
2 ducks.
1 hen, 2 ducks.
3 squawking geese.
1 hen, 2 ducks, 3 squawking geese.
4 Limerick oysters.
1 hen, 2 ducks, 3 squawking geese, 4 Limerick oysters. I'm done. So you can add another one.
No. You can do it. 5 corpulent porpoises.
1 hen, 2 ducks, 3 squawking geese, 4 some kind of oysters, and 5 corpulent porpoises.
And here it is, okay? 6 pairs of Don Alfonso's tweezers.
That's 6? So this is in an actual thing?
It is. It's
Wow.
part of what they call in reference, I've seen it called a couple of different things, but they call it a Tibetan memory. The one I'm looking at now calls it a trick, but it's a Tibetan memory process. It's designed to try to get your mind, stretching your mind around things. And what I'm thinking is this is a game that was probably played in England more often than we know. And
right.
There's many versions of the words, but all of them tend to stick with food-related things. So it's hens, ducks, geese, oysters and corpulent porpoises. I'm not sure where that comes from. But then there's these Don Alfonso tweezers is in it. So it's funny because I'm like, I still haven't really gotten an answer as to what these suckers are, but it appears that they have something to do with food. And Don Alfonso is a famous Italian chef.
I don't remember what I was watching, but something very, very recently made some kind of a reference to having to eat at one of those restaurants where they put your plate together using tweezers.
Okay.
So I just heard it. I don't remember what I was watching or where I heard it, but I always think of that miniature food where they put they're putting the sprigs on in this exact fashion and all of that. So, okay.
Well, so Don Alfonso's tweezers is one of the things that I have never forgotten about this book. There's two more coming up later on that we'll talk about, and I just think it's funny.
Are they as forgettable as Don Alfonso's tweezers? Like, it's odd that you remembered them? Or is it remembered things? Because there are things I remember from this book that are, like, mind-blowing. So it's no...
Well, I think it's a combination of the two, and we'll talk about it when we get there.
Right.
It's interesting.
What I remember from the car ride that Arthur was in is that there's this point where he leaps out of his seat and then the car goes into some kind of a spin.
Right.
Because he had the handbrake when he jumped up.
Right.
When I read that passage again, it reminded me of our trip from New Jersey to Michigan towing your car.
Right.
So we were traveling all night. And we were taking turns driving.
Right.
So I was driving, and then you would try and get some sleep, and then we'd switch, and you would drive. And at this point, I was trying to get some sleep. And you know how you get to this point where you're half sleeping and half not sleeping, and your mind is still going and thinking? So I am sleeping or trying to go to sleep or on this verge of falling asleep. And in my mind, the last thing I can remember is I was driving. And I just jumped out of my seat. And you had made a comment of it had just started raining, so the road sounded different with the tires, but do you remember me jumping out of my skin when we were driving?
Oh, I remember driving.
Yes. So that's what I thought about. It's like, I know what it's like to just jump out of your seat in a car.
Exactly. Well, that's funny.
Part 2. Arthur was having trouble believing the Vogon ships were a hallucination and the Earth had not been destroyed. He decided he needed a drink and headed to the Horse and Groom. However, his appearance was frightening, and he changed his mind. He calculated he had been gone for 8 years, but only 6 months had passed since he left. After a close call of being discovered due to a small dog, Arthur made his way to his house. Inside his house, there was a pile of junk mail, a dead tabby kitten, and a mysterious package that contained a glass fishbowl with "So long and thanks" etched onto its surface. He filled the bowl with water, shook the babelfish from his ear, and put it in the bowl. Arthur cleaned himself up and made his way to the roof of his house. He opened up his mind to connect with the world around him. He discovered a fractured mind and knew it was Fenny. When Arthur discovered himself hovering over his neighbor's rose bushes, he realized he had fallen asleep and was sleep flying. He fell into the roses upon waking. He went back home and went to bed. Arthur woke, went to the refrigerator, and took out the 3 least hairy things in it. He watched them for a few minutes. When they did not move, he ate them for breakfast. His meal killed off a virulent space disease. Arthur called his boss to inform him he would not be back to work until sometime in the spring. Then he unsuccessfully tried to locate the hospital where Fenny was admitted. He went to the pub and told everybody he just got back from California. After many drinks, Arthur got extremely inventive in his lies to help explain his weight loss and aging. 2 months later, Arthur found himself stuck at the same table as the rain god, who never stopped complaining about the rain. Arthur left. As he was driving away, he spotted Fenny and slammed on the brakes. He told her that even though he did not know her, he needed to tell her something important. He offered to drive her to London. He settled for bringing her to the train station, where they could talk for half an hour. In that half hour, Arthur learned that Fenny's real name is Fenchurch, and she was conceived in the ticket queue at Fenchurch Street Station. He got her phone number. He also won in a raffle a record of Scottish bagpipe music. The ticket seller was very persistent. Ford was rebroadcasting the speaking clock back to Earth as a joke. It said it would take 400 years for the pencil-thin beam to get to Earth, and would cause quite a stir when it did.
So Arthur gets dropped off by Russell, Fenchurch's, or we don't know it's Fenchurch yet. Arthur gets dropped off by Russell, and he decides he's going to head over to the Horse and Groom. And on his way there, he starts getting barked at by this little black wire-haired dog.
Mm-hmm.
And the dog's name is Know Nothing Bozo, because it reminded people of the President of the United States. And even though it was Ronald Reagan at the time,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny how the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yep, they called him Know Nothing Bozo, the non-wonder dog.
Oh, that's right, the non-wonder dog.
And this is funny because it's not actually in the book, but they said they called him the non-wonder dog,
Right.
in part because he could not read the auto cue, which I guess in English terms or American terms is the teleprompter.
Right.
So
Kept eating the wrong bowl of food.
Right. He just like the president, he had trouble reading from the screen.
Yeah, he couldn't keep on script. So then Arthur decided he wasn't going to go into the bar because I guess he may have seen his reflection somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And goes home and gets cleaned up.
He returns to his house, and when he returns, he goes through the door and has to push the door pretty hard because of the mail and all of the detritus that's left there from having
Are
been
you
gone.
now intentionally trying to work detritus into the podcast?
Would I do a thing like that?
Yes, that is exactly the sort of thing.
And I didn't even write that on the paper. It just came to my mind. What can I say,
Just
Jeff?
came to your mind.
And amongst the detritus, he finds a box that's very neatly wrapped, but covered with years and years worth of dust. Opens the box, and in the box he finds a crystal bowl.
Right.
And it's engraved with the words "so long" and "thanks."
Yes. And as a reader, we understand that it's from the Dolphins. It's a gift from the Dolphins. He hasn't the slightest idea where it came from, but
Correct.
But we as a reader understand that it's a gift from the Dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
Two things about that scene. First, in the pile of junk mail, I believe there are a bunch of references to American Express.
Right.
So again, Ford is trying, like, American Express is getting a lot of mentions in this book.
You think it's a paid promotion, do you?
I wouldn't know, but wouldn't surprise me. Here's this thought that has kind of gone through my head, and I don't even know what it means or why I have this feeling or why I think it's odd, but I do. So this is a gift from the Dolphins that he finds in this box, which is perfectly wonderful. I don't have any trouble with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Dolphins in our society have been captured and put into tanks and coerced to perform. And the gift that they give Arthur is a representation of their captivity. It's a fishbowl. It's like, well, I don't know what the gift should have been, but I just find it odd that it's a fishbowl. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it's a symbol of captivity. Mm-hmm. It's not... It was a place for him to put his Babel fish. So he was able to take his Babel fish out and give it a home. But I always thought it was odd that the gift from the dolphins was a fishbowl.
Right, right. Well, that's the way Arthur used it. We don't know the exact shape of it, but we can assume it was, global kind. Because he does
say a globe.
Yeah, a globe. Right, right. Well, we can talk about it later, but the other people that get it don't actually put water or fish in it.
No, they put wheat germ.
Right, exactly. Wheat germ and golf balls. So, it's only Arthur who thinks of it as a fishbowl, primarily because he's got a fish in his ear.
True.
So
True.
if you'd had something else, would you put that in instead, and it could have become?
So in theory, it is just a bowl.
Yes.
It is not necessarily a fish bowl.
Right. Right. I guess.
Now you've got me thinking. So hold on here. When Arthur opens it up, mm-hmm. Arthur realized turning it over at the top was a thick rim. Mm-hmm. It was a bowl. Mm-hmm. A fish bowl. Mm-hmm. So they call it a fish bowl when Arthur opens it up.
Right. Right. Okay. That's great.
If he would have left that last line out, if it would have just been a glass bowl, mm-hmm. It could be a candy, it could be anything. But I'll say now, and I'll use the word, unfortunately, he called it a fish bowl right in the beginning.
Right, right.
Which took away room for interpretation.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But, and I was thinking about that, too, because, it's small, though. So it's not like they could have been captured in a fishbowl.
No. Well...
But what could be captured in a fishbowl of that sort is the food that they ate, other small fish.
Yes, that's true. I'm just scrolling through real quick, and every time they refer to the bowl, they call it a fish bowl.
Oh, good.
Because he did put the Babel fish in it, and
right.
Once he put the Babel fish in it, mm-hmm. It is then a fish bowl. But
officially.
Officially. So in later versions, I want them to edit out that last little line at that mm-hmm. first reference.
Right, you got it. We're skating towards that pun thing, so you got to be careful.
That's right. That's right. But he does eventually go back to the bar, and if I had to pick a least favorite part of this book, it would be the scene in the bar where Arthur was trying to explain that there are alchemists in California that turn excess body fat into gold.
Yeah, it was kind of dopey. But it's the kind of thing that Arthur might have come up with since he was, in radio advertising?
That's right, he was. For the BBC, it turns out.
So the next thing that happens in the story is that they go back over to Ford. He has captured an individual, and he's taken his ship. And now he's looped in the clock from London on a tight beam so that it's, I guess, pointed back towards the original Earth. And It's repeating the time over and over again. And they describe Ford as giggling and sniggering around the ship, which I thought was funny.
Yes. So the guy that he took the ship from, he's actually on the ship, I think, in cryogenic chamber of some kind.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
And when they go back to Arthur, it's 2 months later. Mm-hmm. And he ends up with a chance encounter of meeting up with Fenny. And he just slams on the brakes, and they say he avoids hitting her with the car, but hits her with the door as he flings it open.
Right.
But he does hit her arm, and her umbrella flies away, and all of this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So he's really hoping that she's local, but it turns out that she actually lives in London, and he brings her to a pub near the train station that she's going to take a train to London, and they got a half an hour before the train, so he's trying to talk with her desperately because there's something that he needed to tell her. And I don't know, that scene in the pub by the train station was so perfectly awkward. It was kind of exactly the way things happen when you have something important that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to have this conversation, but there's some goofy raffle going on that this woman is trying to sell tickets for, and she comes back to the table 4 or 5 times. But the best part of that scene, it's basically, she goes up to Arthur, asks him if he wants to buy raffle tickets. So to get rid of her, he buys some raffle tickets. Then she turns to Fenchurch, and what about you? He's like, no, here. And he gives her more money to buy more raffle tickets. And then she turns back to Fenchurch, and what about you? And it's like, these were for her.
I love that scene.
They went pretty quickly from the scene I liked the least in any of his books to one of my favorite scenes in any of his books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here's an example of what I like about this book and Douglas Adams' prose in this particular book. Here he's talking to Fenny, and he is stumbling through his words. He wants to say something special, and he's trying to get the words out. And of course, he's being interrupted by the lady selling tickets. But I'm going to read this little passage here.
Okay.
So he says, a story that I must tell you, which would, and he was thrashing about for words. He wanted something along the lines of, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon the fretful porcupine. But he didn't think he could carry it off, and he didn't like the hedgehog reference.
Yes, because her brother, in trying to describe what was wrong with her, said she thought she was a hedgehog.
Right, exactly. But I mean, that's the kind of, I guess, romantic or thoughtful prose that I really enjoy about this particular book.
Yes, that scene in the pub that was so awkward for Arthur trying to figure out the best words was so very typical of the type of things that happen to Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
During that meeting, he learned that Fenny, and she said, don't call me Fenny, her real name is actually Fenchurch, and I will totally agree with her that their time together in the train station would not have gone so well if it wasn't for the woman who was constantly interrupting to sell raffle tickets.
One of the next things that happen here is they do a short introduction of Wonko the Sane.
Okay.
And we'll talk about him later, because even in the chapter they say we'll talk about him later.
Right.
But what I really appreciated, and this is so typically Adams, it just makes me laugh every time. So here's a paragraph from that particular section. He watched the long, slow Pacific waves come in along the sand, and waited for the nothing that he knew was about to happen. As the time came for it not to happen, it duly didn't happen. And so the afternoon wore itself away, and the sun dropped beneath the long line of the sea, and the day was gone.
Yes.
That's another one of those paragraphs in which his prose just really appeal to me.
Right. Absolutely.
But it's funny that he uses that same joke about nothing happening.
Yes.
and here,
and continuing.
Right.
Yeah.
Continuing, nothing continued to happen. And still, it's fresh and new, and it's good,
right.
You know?
Yes.
Part 3. Fenchurch's phone number was written on the raffle ticket with which Arthur won the record of Scottish bagpipe music. He searched for it but never found it. In a state of sorrow and depression, he decided, out of superstition, to go back to the same cafeteria he was at just before he met her. The rain god was there again and explained he has a 15-year diary documenting that it always rains where he is. Arthur convinced him to show it to somebody. Arthur bought a computer to help him pinpoint the exact location of his cave on prehistoric Earth. It was impossible, so he guessed. He went to the determined location of his cave in London and knocked on the appropriate door. Fenchurch answered. He would never know he got the location exactly right. During his time with Fenchurch, that day, she told him there was something wrong with her, and he had to figure out what it was. They went to Hyde Park, where they walked, cuddled, kissed, and told stories. After her story, Fenchurch told Arthur she has developed a fear of sudden revelations. She recounted the day that the earth was seemingly destroyed. She was at a small cafe in Rickmansworth. She said it happened on the day all the dolphins disappeared. Arthur was unaware of the disappearance and seemed confused. Fenchurch, on a hunch, gave Arthur back his copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It had fallen out of his bag in the back of her brother's car. Arthur and Fenchurch went back to her place. Arthur was tasked with figuring out what was wrong with her. He discovered that Fenchurch's feet did not touch the ground. Arthur saw that she was afraid of how he would react and was getting upset. He told her that perhaps she could do what he could do, and walked out the second-floor loft door and flew. During his travels, Ford Prefect found himself awakened constantly by the sounds of gunfire. He realized the ship he stowed away on was involved in a war. He put some information from the guide onto a thumb drive and plugged it into the ship's main computer. The ship decided to go on vacation and left the battle. Ford finally got some sleep.
In the story with Arthur, it jumps to the next day, and he's in a panic, and he's calling the bar because he won a raffle for the Scottish bagpipe music, and the ticket that he had to turn in to get the record had Fenchurch's phone number on it. And that is exactly the type of thing that happens to Arthur as well.
Right. And were you disappointed that it wasn't ticket 42?
Well, actually, I wasn't. I think if it was, I'd have said that's a bit ham-handed,
Yeah.
and he's just pushing it.
I bet he wrote 42 and someone told him he had to change it.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would believe that. So Arthur is desperately trying to figure out how to get in touch with Fenchurch and how he can possibly do it, and he basically gives up. And he's got nothing else to do, so for kicks, he decides he wants to find out where his old cave was on prehistoric Earth. He knows it was somewhere in the British Isles, but... Mm-hmm. And I liked how he went to a computer store and to the Apple store, kind of, because he went to buy an Apple computer.
Right.
Back in the 80s, and this was brand new Apple computer.
I got a kick out of this scene too, but not for the same reason. What tickles me about this scene has nothing to do with Adams or the writing, actually. It's because you and I have had many, many discussions about when have we done enough thinking to make a purchase of that significance. And you have always told me that there had to be 3 reasons.
3 reasons.
And Arthur only lists 2. And I keep thinking, there's got to be another reason.
Well, the first reason always defaults to because I want to.
Oh, see, now that's a new twist.
No, that's always been it.
Oh, okay.
The first reason is because I want to.
Okay.
But you need 3 reasons, so you need to come up with 2 more legitimate reasons.
Ah.
So I'm fine with him only listing 2 because the first one is because I want to.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, I'll have to remember that in the future because I always thought you had to have 3 legitimate reasons.
Oh, you are going to have a whole lot more stuff. So anyway, the infinite improbability field is still swirling around Arthur because his ability to pinpoint the exact location of the cave and having it be Fenchurch's address is perfect. And I like how he included this whole scene of raising Fenchurch's cello to bring it in the second-story loft door is all just set up so we know that door is there
Right.
for a future scene.
Uh-huh. Oh, but here, I have to point out this to you so that you can reiterate your thought that Arthur should remember the name of the computer. Because here in chapter 17, it actually says when he goes into the Apple store to buy the computer,
Right.
he wonders whether he should mention Eddie the shipboard computer. So here he actually remembers the name, you know.
Yes, the salesman asks if he knows anything about computers, and he's like, should I tell him about Eddie, who would have just known the answer that he was looking for immediately. Yeah, I got a kick out of that, actually. I didn't write anything about it, but believe me, I got a kick out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So Arthur gets tasked with trying to figure out what's wrong with Fenchurch. And I think that that is a totally unfair question, and nothing good could ever come from it. During the day that Arthur is spending with Fenchurch, they go to a park, and he tells her a story of his encounter with a stranger in a train station who ate half of his package of biscuits. And that package of biscuits turned out to be the other way around because his biscuits were under the newspaper. And I saw an interview in 1985 on Late Night with David Letterman where Douglas Adams said that this was a real story that happened to him.
Right.
And the first time I saw it, I loved the story, I loved the book, and I completely believed that it was something that actually had happened to him.
Right.
But I looked it up and I watched it again recently, and when Douglas Adams is telling the story, it sounded more like he was trying to quote the book correctly rather than telling a story that happened to him.
Yes.
So now I'm not sure whether or not it's a real story that happened to him, because it didn't sound like a story. It sounded like he was trying to quote the book, and he kept mixing it up a little bit.
Right, right. I can appreciate that, but I also wonder, you know, it's hard to know whether under those circumstances, whether the conversations that David Letterman has with his guests are real or they're scripted. And
they're scripted. They're 100% scripted.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I think that's what you notice more than anything there, is that I think Douglas Adams wants to go off script and tell his own story in his own voice, but he's promised that he would, you know, recite this script back, and that's where
that
he
could be
stumbles through it. You know, I mean that's the impression that I got from it, and it wouldn't surprise me because I think David Letterman is a little too vain to let someone upstage him, so he wants to make sure that he has the best jokes on the show.
Yes, then don't have Douglas Adams on as a guest.
Exactly. At least that's the impression I got.
Right. Fenchurch also told a story that was very short, but I think it's something that everybody should be able to relate to, which is finally noticing something and having a great weight lifted off of you that you never realized was there.
Right. Yep, I do like that. These are the sentimental parts of the writing that we were talking about earlier as well.
So the next story that Fenchurch tells Arthur is her story about being in the small cafe in Rickmansworth and why she has this dislike of sudden revelations. And during this story, Arthur is asking when it happened, and she was saying things like, you know, the day the dolphins all disappeared. And Arthur had no idea what she was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I was wondering, how do you not know? And then I realized there's no possible way he could have known.
Right. Isn't that funny? Because remember, even in the movie, we made a reference or a revelation that when they come back from the bar and Arthur is yelling at the workmen for having destroyed his home, they show his home torn to pieces, and there's a newspaper, like a tabloid newspaper cover.
Right.
And it says, dolphins disappear, you know?
Yes.
So in the movie, they gave you an opportunity to believe that he'd read the paper and saw that they disappeared, but not in the book. They don't really make any reference to him having any knowledge of it.
No.
And he clearly does not.
He clearly does not. And Fenchurch was kind of having the same sense about Arthur that Arthur was having about her, that they have something in common.
Mm-hmm.
Then she gives him back his copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which fell out of his bag in her brother's car. And she's like, I had a feeling this was yours, or something like that. Like,
exactly.
Anyway, here they get back to her apartment, and after trial and error and a lot of getting warmer, getting colder, in a very playful manner, Arthur figures out that Fenchurch's feet don't touch the floor. And there was a pretty accurate depiction of Fenchurch's reaction after he discovered that her feet do not touch the ground.
Oh, gosh. Yep.
And so, like I said, in setting up this future scene, we now know that there is a loft door on the second story, and Arthur, to relieve her anxieties, asks, I wonder if you can do this. And he just walks right out this loft door, and the chapter ends.
I also like the fact that here's where Douglas Adams is talking about Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler. And I just love his references here to the fact that if you know the song, then you know what's happening. And going on and on about Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler.
Right. Another one of those occasions where he's coming out of the page and talking directly to the reader outside of the story.
Exactly. We're about to get there, but he just completely breaks the fourth wall in chapter 25.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Part 4. Fenchurch discovered Arthur could fly. Arthur wanted her to try, so had her step onto his outstretched hand. In her fear, Fenchurch tried to think about other things and distracted herself from what she was doing. Fenchurch began to fly. During their flight, she began to fall. Arthur caught her, but could not support her. So, he let go of her and pushed her away. Her incredulous surprise was enough to distract her from falling, and Arthur hooked her little finger and swung her around and up again. After a little bit more of experimental flying, Arthur and Fenchurch had sex on the wing of an in-flight 747 outside the window of Mrs. E. Capelson of Boston, Massachusetts. She did not tell anybody about it. They went to California to meet the man on the planet who knows the most about the dolphins and their disappearance, Wonko the Sane. He is visited by angels who wear Dr. Scholl sandals. They are on their feet all day because they work at a place they call The Message. Wonko lives outside the asylum. After reading the instructions on a packet of toothpicks, he decided the world was insane. He wanted to put it in an insane asylum until it got better. So he built an inside-out house and stayed inside it. They went out on the beach and Wonko showed them a bowl the dolphins left for him. Written on it was, "So long and thanks for all the fish." Arthur and Fenchurch told him they each had similar bowls. He had them put their ear to his bowl and heard a message from the Campaign to Save the Humans. After their visit with Wonko, Arthur struggles to remember an address that was given to him by a man named Prack. They waited for a passing flying saucer. In a day or two, Ford Prefect arrived on the spaceship he caused to stop fighting in the war and go on vacation to the Earth. Ford Prefect told them how he saved civilization by stopping a guy from selling Sirius Cybernetics Corporation advanced music substitute systems by putting him into cryostasis. He broadcast the London speaking clock throughout the ship in hopes that the phone bill would bankrupt the guy. Arthur and Fenchurch wanted to know if Ford could get them on the ship. As the ship was about to leave, Ford arrived and shouted to the watching crowd that there has been a major scientific breakthrough. He pointed at Arthur and Fenchurch and told them to get the boxes of equipment. The boxes contained video equipment and videotapes of classic movies. The ship left and went back to the war it was previously fighting. Arthur and Fenchurch finally arrived to see, in 30-foot-high letters of fire, God's final message to his creation. On the path to the message, they chanced upon Marvin. Marvin was battered and crippled, and is now 37 times older than the universe itself. All of his parts have been replaced at least 50 times, except for all the diodes down his left side. Arthur and Fenchurch helped Marvin read the message through a telescope, one letter at a time. When he read, "We apologize for the inconvenience," Marvin felt good about it, and the lights in his eyes went out for the last time.
Yeah, so at this point, this is chapter 25, when Douglas Adams is literally breaking the fourth wall here. And he's asking questions of the reader. He said, "No, wait a minute. I bet you're all wondering what happened to Trillian. And you're wondering what happened to Mela and her moodily lit tubes of toothpaste."
Right.
And you're also wondering, does Arthur, in fact, well, let's just use the F word?
Yes.
And I get a great kick out of that. And he says, if you're not interested in finding out the answer to that question, then skip on to the end, because that's a good bit and it has Marvin in it.
Right. Yes. So that totally told me that many, many people have asked him about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were talking about Agda and Mela, like, what happened? The next thing we know, Arthur's all by himself 5 years later, and then he's like, "What happened? The book ended." It was like,
exactly. Oh, I get a kick out of that. That he doesn't have to take himself so seriously. It just is another reminder of what kind of an artist he is.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And during that part 2, he was talking about padding the books and putting in a lot of unnecessary information. And I laughed when he went through a very long and very mundane description of the life of Arthur because of the crack he made of the nice fat books
right,
that kind of writing makes that the American market thrives on.
Exactly. Isn't that awesome?
And the prose that you like, I don't know if it's exactly the same as the prose of his that I like, but I like when he does this kind of thing. For some reason, I really, really liked the description of Arthur and Fenchurch flying.
Right.
He described it as they drifted up, spiraling slowly around each other, like sycamore seeds falling from the sycamore trees in the autumn, except going the other way. And to answer the question of, does Arthur actually
use the F word?
use the F word? They finally got together, and Arthur and Fenchurch did it on the wing of a plane, and they were witnessed by Mrs. E. Keppelson of Boston, Massachusetts, who decided not to tell anybody because this was for her.
Yeah, I love that scene.
And I guess they went out flying, we'll call it, every night.
Right.
And it became a thing locally. And since they both needed to understand what happened to them, they wanted to meet the only man on Earth that might be able to help them, which was the previously referenced Wonko the Sane.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Wonko's house.
Oh, yes.
This is what stuck with me more than anything else in the whole quadrilogy. Wonko thought that the world was crazy, so he wanted to put it in an asylum. So he built a house that was inside out with the bricks on the inside and the wallpaper on the outside. So when he was in his house, he was outside the asylum.
Beautiful, huh?
Yes.
Absolutely incredible.
Wonko's thing that made him understand that the world was insane was seeing detailed instructions on a pack of toothpicks.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember personally, when I used to work in a grocery store stocking shelves, coming across a package of frozen waffles. I believe it was Downy Flake.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at the instructions, and it said, place in a toaster like you were toasting a slice of bread. Toast once. If it is not done as much as you like, toast again. I'm like, really? You needed to put this on the package.
Oh, yeah, and I really enjoyed the conversation that Arthur has when he's trying to find out Wonko's address and information. He contacts a friend of his who's in
tabloid.
Yes, tabloid. Yeah. He's a tabloid writer, and it's so strange the way he uses language, and it's just very, very interesting.
It is. I guess what I find amazing is when you are reading it or listening to it, the tabloid guy seems to be paying absolutely no attention to what Arthur is saying. However, he's paying extremely close attention to everything Arthur is saying. It just doesn't sound like it.
Exactly. I just absolutely love that.
Because Arthur throws in this thing about the rain god, and he's like, that was you? He was like, wow.
Thanks for that.
So this is this guy that has a brain that can have two conversations at the same time without losing track of either.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. And this is where, let's see if I can find it here. He's talking with him about the news of the dolphins, and the gentleman saying to him about how he couldn't write a story about that because what would you say? I mean, the only news would be the continuing absence of whatever the story was about.
Right. Yes.
Again, nothing happened. But
yes.
I know what the other one of those pieces of literature here that's stuck with me forever is the Wonko the Sane's wife. Her name is Arcane Jill. And
yes.
When I heard Arcane Jill, I just thought that was great. And way back, I don't know when, my first experience with online gaming, I decided that Dale the Arcane would be the perfect name for me.
Oh, okay, yes. I remember that name.
Yep, and Arcane Dale is one of my other little handles that I use. And I laugh because the way I think of it is like, people that know me are like, you know, such bizarre bits of information from all over the world that nobody knows, you know, the arcane knowledge of Bryan, you know.
Yes.
That Arcane Jill stuck with me. In fact, like I said, I took a piece of it with me throughout my whole life.
So during their visit with Wonko, he showed them the bowl the dolphins left for him.
Right.
Arthur and Fenchurch were surprised by it, and even more surprised that each one of them also had a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And another great example of how Douglas Adams' style of writing sets up something that seems like it is a big deal, but isn't, and the revelation that it isn't is what makes it funny, is when they were talking about Wonko and the fish bowls.
Right.
Wonko asked what they did with their fish bowls.
Right.
He told him that his wife kept wheat germ in his until last night.
Right.
And Arthur's like, what happened last night? He's like, we ran out of wheat germ.
Yep.
And then he asked if they held theirs up to their ear. And they said they hadn't, so they did. And then, for me, I was disappointed in the explanation for what happened. And there was something about different dimensions and a shadow earth and all of that. And I don't feel that bad about it because if you go back to the same interview on Late Night with David Letterman, Douglas Adams says that he knows everything can be contradictory from one version of the story to the next and from one novel to the other. And he states that he does not understand the sense it is meant to make and has decided to share that sense of bafflement and bewilderment with his readers. So, so that tells me he didn't even understand what was happening.
Well, it is funny. I mean, it's interesting that when Arthur picks up his bowl, he does make a reference to the chime, the sound that it makes when he clangs it on the side or something like that, and how it echoes. And
Yes,
echoes.
it's a pure tone, no matter how it's held or how full it is.
Right, right. And I did think that was interesting. And here, the one thing that we notice also is that Arthur's bowl says, "So long and thanks," and
Correct.
Wonko's bowl says, "So long and thanks for all the fish."
And they do make a reference that he has something to do with the dolphins at SeaWorld.
The dolphins at SeaWorld?
Wonko tells them that he studied and loved them and swam with them and fed them fish and tried to learn their language, which was extremely, extremely difficult. And then he complained that at the end, after all was said and done, he realized that it was pointless because they could speak ours.
Right, right. Exactly.
So because Wonka was completely involved with the dolphins, that's why his says "so long and thanks for all the fish."
Right, right.
Different than Arthur's.
Yes, it is different than Arthur's. And that's one of the reasons why Wonko is the way he is.
Yes.
But, he doesn't actually ever answer Fenchurch and Arthur's questions. And we're left to understanding of what happens based on the words and the emotions that are carried through the bowl when they put their ear up to it. But Wonko never tells Arthur or Fenchurch what he actually knows about.
No, he didn't.
The destruction of Earth and the replacement, etc., etc. But he does talk about the angels with green wings and Dr. Scholl's sandals.
That work at the message.
Right, right.
So what I liked is that after their visit with Wonko, when they're taking a plane home, they just happened to sit next to the lady who saw them having sex on the wing.
Yep, Edna.
Edna.
What a lucky gal, huh?
Yes. So finally here, near the end of the book, Arthur and Ford are reunited. I find it extremely funny that the way Ford got to Earth is that this battleship that he was on, that he couldn't sleep because of all of the fighting, he took all the brand new information that was uploaded into the guide, put it on a thumb drive, and stuck it in the computer to make him go on vacation.
Right.
But it was the Earth.
Right.
That all the information that he loaded in was from the Earth. So this battle cruiser just lands in the middle of this field in England. And Ford gets out and meets up with Arthur and Fenchurch. And he still can't tell a straightforward story.
No.
Here's where he tries to tell us about the guy he put in stasis and making a phone call to Earth. And it's almost as bad as Arthur's story he told in the pub about the alchemy in Southern California.
Right. And he keeps complaining about space lag and how he can't get his thoughts together. Asks for coffee, and then when he gets coffee, he doesn't know why he asked for it.
Yes, exactly. And then Douglas Adams decided that he didn't want us wondering if he forgot about Trillian and Zaphod, so he mentions them in a very short little brief. Hey, what happened to them? Oh, I'm not really sure.
They had some children, I think, right?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So Arthur and Fenchurch decide that they want to go find the message that Wonko had mentioned and had the angels with the Dr. Scholl sandals. So Arthur, remembering that he was told an address by a guy named Prack, sat down and figured out the address, and they're on their way. And then they get to the message, and we know they're going to see Marvin because he told us about that.
Back on chapter 25.
Back in chapter 25. And Marvin is decrepit. And Marvin said he was 37 times older than the universe itself because of all the traveling through time he has done.
again, you and I are reading and looking and listening to the book at the same time we're reading. And I just think it's funny that during Arthur's conversation with Marvin, when Douglas Adams reads the book, he doesn't actually say this, but in the book, it says that right before they pick him up and carry him off, Arthur tells Marvin to shut up. And then they start walking down the long line.
So the big reveal at the end of this book is God's final message to his creation. And they help Marvin, who can't read it because his optics are going, so they help him use a telescope so he can see one letter at a time. And he slowly reveals that the message is, "We apologize for the inconvenience." And Marvin felt good about it.
There you go. And I thought you would feel especially good about the way they approach that, because doesn't it have that flavor of long, drawn out?
Drawn out, yes. Right.
Painfully slow reveal.
It works in audio, but not so much on a page.
That's right.
So that's why I always wonder why they do that type of a thing in a novel, because you can look at the whole page at once and kind of read the message. The only thing we didn't talk about that I don't want to talk about because I don't understand its point was the epilogue.
Well, now that you brought it up, don't we have to talk about it?
Pretend it doesn't exist.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Well, I think he intended for us to pretend like it didn't exist. Oh, gosh. It's so funny, you know?
So anyway, if you haven't read the book, he does an epilogue at the end, and I will just read the final line of the epilogue, which will make you feel not too bad about not reading it. And that line is, "There was a point to this story, but it has temporarily escaped the chronicler's mind." So he's telling this long story about something you don't know what it has to do with anything, and then you get this line, and you're like, okay.
Oh my gosh.
Next month, we are going to do more of the same, except we're going to listen to it, and we're going to do Quandary Phase, which will be the audio play for BBC Radio of their depiction of So Long and Thanks for All the Fish.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
I think it'll be pretty similar. I have no idea. I really liked what they did with Life, the Universe, and Everything. That
right.
Added a little bit without changing it. So I'm hoping they can keep up that same thing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
All right. So we've come to the end. So say goodbye, Bryan.
Well, Jeff, what I really want to say is if you didn't enjoy the last hour and 15 minutes,
yeah,
we apologize for the inconvenience.
Yes. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. A special thanks this episode goes out to Danny Ortega for portraying Gag Hellfront in our commercial. We would also like to thank Kelly Lesnick for doing our summary. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareapretyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.